Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. And cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hey everybody, welcome back to Eggs. This week we have special guest, Susan Hamilton Meier. Susan is a brand strategist and visual artist and the founder of the Susan Meier Studio. She is on a mission to dispel the myth that creativity and strategy are at odds to help business leaders electrify their work and amplify their impact. Susan has developed a unique point of view that is driven by the merger of analytical and creative thinking. She's designed a set of processes and tools that help get teams to problem solve more creatively. Helping them define their mission, vision, and differentiators with clarity, she brings brands to life in the world. She's gravitated toward healthcare, which offers up an exciting challenge of finding creative solutions for some of the most complex problems out there today. So Susan holds a BA in art history. She's an amazing artist and has a lot of history and interesting things I think we're going to be able to talk about. So without any further ado, join me in welcoming Susan Meier. Hey, Susan.
Hi there.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you guys?
Not too bad. Thank you for making the time for us. Really appreciate it. Especially in the middle of this COVID crisis. Everyone kind of has a little more time than normal, but still it's it's nice of you to join us and talk about your history. Let's get started. Give us a little background about you, where you come from. You spent some time in Harvard getting an MBA, and you're a graphic designer. So you obviously have a vast background. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my path has been kind of a one big zigzag. So I started out, in undergrad studying art and art history, and I've been making art since as long as I can remember. So that's always been a part of my world, and discovered strategy and management consulting right toward the end of college. I never took an economics class or a math class or anything like that. But those big management consulting firms came to campus to recruit, and I just kind of sparked something for me. This description they had was about solving complex puzzles, and I thought that sounded really interesting. And they interview you they give you a case, like a scenario, a real life scenario of, what would be the 5 things you'd think about if this problem were presented to you? And I just thought that was fascinating. And I came to it totally fresh with no frameworks or, I wasn't trying to check off a list in my head. And I think that was a great way to start. And I got a real education from that first job I had at the Boston Consulting Group, which was almost like an MBA before I actually went and got an MBA. And they sent me to get an MBA, which was very generous of them and was an amazing experience, and was sometimes a surreal experience. There were moments when I would find myself going, how did I get here? I'm a painter. And all of these people are engineers, or they've been in the military, and they had these very sort of rigorous analytical backgrounds. But I learned such a lot from, both the professors there and also from my peers, and they've become lifelong friends. And so the path that I've taken since then has really been toggling back and forth between, a career in making art and a career in doing strategy consulting. And I'm happy to say that they have started to converge, in the last 10 years or so since I've been running my own business. That's been one of the really amazing things about, having your own show, that you can really craft what it is you do and what it is you bring to the table in a specific way. And I've been able to merge those two things. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah, you touched on something. Oh, sorry, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say, I noticed that on your LinkedIn profile in the Boston Consulting Group, it's listed as in Singapore as well. Did they send you over there at any point?
They did. I was there for 3 years. And that was an amazing experience. I was 22, 23 years old when I went there. I'd never been to Asia. And I traveled all over Asia for that work. And the project was for a company that was it was an international company, American-based international company that was just entering Asia, because it was quite a while ago. And what I found so fascinating, they were selling refrigerators, washing machines, microwaves, things like that. And we did this whole piece of consumer insight work, talking to women in, India, Japan, China, Philippines, about how they used those appliances and, what cleaning clothes meant to them and what role it had in their lives, or, why they preferred to wash dishes by hand, or, what they were looking for, not looking for in a microwave. And I found that just fascinating, that human insight and that connection that people have with the products in their lives. That's a sort of an intimate connection, even with something that seems like a very utilitarian experience, washing your dishes or your clothes. Turns out to be a cultural experience and a family experience. And, I think that really sowed the seeds of getting into brand strategy, where that connection that individuals have with brands is this kind of mysterious, intimate, really a friendship, definitely a personal relationship.
Yeah, actually, I spent some time in the Philippines, and a lot of people don't realize that they still wash their clothes by hands there.
Yeah.
And pretty much, I would say 60% of them or more probably do. And it's a all day process to do. Not easy. So that had to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So, I mean, just that you bring up this relationship with brand, because I think it's one of these things that you don't really think about. Maybe if you're just Joe consumer, but sort of naturally you start to, have inclination towards different brands that you support. You're always watching for the next pair of Nikes, or you're looking out for the next whatever, it's funny how you form these allegiances and you kind of don't even realize it. But it is very intimate. I really like that word for describing this relationship with a brand, because you really are. I mean, you bring it into your home, you share it with your friends and family. I mean, the very few things you do that with, and it really is only the people that you have intimate relationships with. So it's interesting that dichotomy, or this sort of paradigm between the two things and how they run parallel. So that's an interesting observation. One of the things I wanted to talk about that you started to lead in with, when you gave us sort of your little background dissertation, was this idea of sort of creativity in business, and how there are these parallels. I think that, for many years, at least in my experience, there's a pretty firm line between sort of business and creativity. Even within a lot of ad agencies, there's a pretty strong line between account and creative. They still sort of have these barriers between them. And I think so much of it is, people sort of attribute a certain set of characteristics to a creative mind, and they're not always the best ones for business. But I have noticed in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, and probably longer, but just more in my awareness lately, is the value that corporations and people like that are putting on creative thinkers now. And the more they're investing, is they're looking for ways to optimize and become more efficient and things like that. They're looking for more ways to be creative. And it does require a different kind of mind. It's not always the most analytical mind. It's sometimes somebody who's a little looser. So I wonder if you just talk a little bit about that experience, just, being able to flex your creativity, as an artist and as a painter, and the sorts of problems you might encounter, let's say creating a piece. I've seen some of your work, and it's very technical, and especially the stuff that you've done in glass and mirror. To make all these cuts and things, it would be, it's very technical work. And so the challenges you might have to overcome as an artist are probably not unlike what you would encounter in business.
Absolutely. There is so much more overlap than one might think, initially. I'll go back to the first thing that you said first, which is, because I also came up in that world of agencies where, especially way back historically, there was the creatives with a capital C, right? And then whatever they were called, the strategists, the planners, the account people. And there was very much almost a Chinese wall between the two. And one was in service of the other. And that depended maybe on the context, who was who, but they were very separate. And that can be a real hurdle, and was at times a hurdle for me. I think I was able to straddle the two just because I had that art background. But you certainly, I had a job description, and my job description was a strategist. And so I did definitely feel sometimes very kind of constrained in that. And I actively sought out, the kinds of agencies who were a little more progressive in working in a holistic way versus being very siloed. That was a major thing that I looked for as I made career choices about where to work. I do think, and I think you mentioned this too, I do think that as time has gone on, those barriers have come down quite a bit, partly because the imperative for innovation is so strong, and being innovative is getting, exponentially harder as time goes on, right? We live in this rapidly evolving global economy, and it's just harder to think up new ideas that are meaningful, and the pace at which which we need to do that is so much faster, right? Driven by technology and driven by globalization. And so I think that those old ways of thinking, like there's two kinds of people and those people need to be in silos, everybody's kind of started to throw that up in the air and go, I don't care who does it, just come up with a good idea, right? Everybody hold hands and do it. And if the guy from accounting comes up with the next big innovative, creative idea, wonderful, let's just get it done. Yeah. So I think there's much, which is great, which is, there's much more of a spirit of that. Some of those old myths still kind of prevail, but I definitely think there's more of a collaborative spirit nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that, we are moving past that. And it's one of these things, I mean, in your mind, if we're using sort of traditional agency as a model, understanding we've maybe moved past it or whatever, but when this wall existed, one of the things I know I've always appreciated, I come from the art side. So I'm like a visual artist, creative director on my side. And so I have always appreciated the account executives and the strategists and people like that have some creative background, whether they actually are artists like you are, or if they, happen to have some design background, but ended up taking a job in strategy or whatever. I find that those collaborations are much easier to make because there's some empathy involved, right? They have an understanding of how you do your work. In my early days in agency, things were so siloed and so separated that, we didn't, as creatives, really have a whole heck of a lot of an idea of what the account folks were doing. We were quick to diminish it and say how stupid it was compared to our creative adventure, But it was when I got a little bit older and I started moving up in agency and I started looking at the budgets and things involved and how the, our high and mighty creative thing accounted for, 2 to 5% of the overall sell. And, and strategists were pulling in 98% of it. And so it became a reality to me where I started to go, well, wait a minute, even though we're that final touch point, it's all that thought up to this that really changes things. And I think that's a disservice that a lot of old style agencies have done to their creative people, because I think, working more collaboratively, the way that you've described it, where you can maybe work on a small team with your account resources and your strategists and planners, I think, ultimately will make for better creative.
I think you also touch on an interesting point, which is that there's many different types of creativity. And so in, let's say, advertising world, we're typically thinking about creativity as being visual creativity, and you and I are visual creatives. And in that world, as you said, it really helps to be with somebody else who is somewhat visually creative because they kind of get it. And definitely not everybody is wired that way, but everybody's creative in some way. Mm-hmm. And certainly people who are really good with those financial projections, that can be very, very creative. It's a different type of creativity than I have. And they may not be visual, but that's also a very valid and important type of creativity.
But yeah, it's actually one of the things that Mike and I discovered really early in the show, because Mike, he's not a visual creative, but he's a club DJ and really creative guy on the music side, right? And so, both he and I have sort of gelled over music and creativity and stuff for a long time. And one of the things that we noticed early on, especially right when we were kicking off the show and we were taking every guest we could get, and, anybody that was willing to come on was perfect for us. And, we started grabbing musicians and artists and creative directors, just people we knew, right? And what we found is that there's sort of this creative current that runs through everybody. And, I flex it as a brand campaign. You flex it as a strategy. He flexes it as a set one night. And, your account coordinator or your planner or somebody may flex it in some other way entirely. But you're right, to discount another person's creativity or frame it that creativity must be something you can put pen to paper or whatever, I think sort of cheapens what creativity actually is.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is interesting that you asked about is, the kind of analytical piece of making visual art. And my experience is it's almost like the inverse process with the strategy work and the visual art. So when I start a strategy project, there's a very sort of clear, linear, analytical brief that you're working with, and that's the concept. And then what I do is I take that and I personally start visually. So I actually will lay out a presentation before I know what the content is, which is, I think, backwards to the way most people do it. But I sort of create like a picture of what it's going to be, and then I fill it with words. When I make art, it starts with a very kind of creative, visual, sort of conceptual concept. And then it turns into a way more detailed analytical project than any of my strategy projects are, because it's like measuring stuff and thinking about the materials and what kind of adhesive is going to work with what kind of support, and what colors are going to blend together, and how do I actually think about which of those do I want to mix watercolor with acrylic, and how is that going to, it's all of these kind of very technical things that take the majority of the time to execute. And then you do it and it doesn't look right, and you do it again and you do it again. The process is very similar to the strategy practice, right? You try something, you iterate, you collaborate, and there's a conceptual piece that's all exciting, and then there's a execution piece that's quite buttoned up and rigorous. And I think that's certainly a myth about creativity or artists, right? That it's all conceptual and you just have this big idea and then it somehow magically comes to life. If you've ever stood inside of a Richard Serra sculpture, that is a mathematical endeavor. That's an engineering problem, right?
Yeah.
Like that you're building something that has to stand up, that has to meet specifications of mathematical proportions. And all of that takes 99% of the time. The sketch took 1% of the time.
Yeah. It's funny, as you were just saying that, I was thinking about my process in making a mix, for example, is I'll start with one song and then I figure out what key it's in. Then I find another song that works with it. And then it's a whole, it's a 60-minute mix, but it takes me like 10 hours to figure out how to put it all together and make it work in a cohesive way. I kind of want to ask you a little bit about branding versus like a marketing plan. I think a lot of people think they're the same versus, a brand might have, your vision statement, your overall kind of objectives, whereas a marketing plan is touching on one point and how you're going to accomplish that. Can you kind of break that down for the layman like myself who doesn't know much about branding and marketing?
Absolutely. And you know what? Those words also, much like strategy and creativity, mean so many different things to so many different people. So it can be confusing. But I think whatever words you choose or anyone chooses, the concept is still the same. There's and it's actually not unlike the art making process that we were just talking about. There's concept and there's execution. And I think what you're referring to as a marketing plan tends to be more, when people use that or think about that, it's more the execution piece. And often people want to jump right there, right? Like, how do I get more followers? Like, how do I promote my stuff? How do I get more traction and build my platform? And that's absolutely important. And that's, what is kind of closer in the process to driving conversion or sales or visibility and awareness. But branding, the way I define it and the way I think a lot of branding agencies define it, is the step before that, where you're thinking about, who are we? And as you just said, like, what's our vision? What do we stand for? What are our values? What do we uniquely bring to the party that we can bring over and over again consistently, and that people actually care about? And so I think, those two components, or actually there's three components in there. One is, who are you genuinely, and what do you and can you and do you want to really do to serve the world? And then who is it that you're serving, and what do they really care about? And then the third piece is, how is that different from anything else that's going on? And then you write your marketing plan.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess if you don't really know what your business is or how to, kind of define it, you can't really go forward from there and create a marketing plan. So identifying that is really key. Let's see.
Yeah, no, so one of the things you touched on right before that, and I think maybe it's a good subject to bring up, especially now, just sort of as we're going through, the COVID-19 crisis and we're dealing with all this stuff. One of the big things that you pointed out, and I think the way you talked about it, it sounds sort of simple or dismissive, was this jump from art to strategy. And, I think for a lot of people, now is a prime time to innovate. It's a prime time to get into, a lot of things, even if you plan to stick with your current career or whatever, like, things are changing. And so now we have this opportunity to adapt, but I don't think that everybody looks at it as an opportunity. So I wondered if you would talk a little bit about just sort of, as it pertains to creativity or just in general, overcoming fear and the things that are holding us back from sort of, I guess, realizing what it is we want to be. Because I think so many people can relate with, this idea that we would love to be something, or we would like to achieve X or whatever it is, but so many of us never do it. And, and myself included, there's a number of these kinds of things that I've not been able to overcome, for one reason or another. I sort of presume it's based on some fear or something that's sort of built into us, but I wonder if you can maybe explore that topic with us a little bit, and just how do we overcome what's holding us back?
Sure. And so relevant right now, right? I mean, change is scary. That's a universal truth. And also change is a constant. That's also a universal truth. At the moment, we can all kind of look around at world events and realize this is in kind of high gear right now. Everything's changing. Everything's up for grabs. What will the future look like? And so I think many of us are living in a heightened awareness of that, or a heightened anxiety about what will the future look like for me, for my business, for my family. But if we think about, business and opportunity, it may not be the first place you go, right? To think like, oh, look, we have a global crisis. Wow, this is a great opportunity.
Sure. Well, especially if you've just been laid off.
I mean, the first place you go is like, oh, what's going to happen? And then once you get past what's going to happen to me and my family, and then you think, what's going to happen to my business? And there's a natural panic, like, will I have to change and reinvent? And the answer is likely yes, right? Because we're all going to be changing and evolving and reinventing. And then that's where, if you can make that leap from fear and panic into, okay, let me reframe this as an opportunity. And let me step back from the situation and think about, okay, if the world has changed, and that means people's needs have changed. And let me think about who I am, which probably hasn't changed very much, but maybe the ways that I can serve have changed, or maybe even new ways have opened up. And I think that's a good place to start. And then, if you commit to that process of reinvention and give it time and space to evolve and do that kind of self-reflection work, which is not unlike going through a branding project in regular times, but this is kind of the branding project on steroids, right? Like, okay, let me really step back and reflect on, who I am, what I offer, what I value, and look at what's happening around me and who the potential audiences are for what it is that I bring. That's an exciting exercise to go through.
Well, yeah, maybe there's
brand new places.
Yeah, maybe there's a way to sort of draw a parallel. If you think of sort of your life, and you as the human being, and sort of think of that as your brand. Yeah. As with any brand, we can always point to the Apples and the Nikes and things like that, who've had these really tight evolutions, and some, more extravagant revolutions in terms of branding and things like that than others. But I think that if we sort of look at ourselves, in the frame of a branding project, or sort of think of ourselves as this ongoing project, maybe it helps solidify these ideas, because when you frame yourself that way, and I don't know, I don't want to say stop thinking of yourself as human, but think of yourself as a work in progress maybe, and sort of, recognize that change is always coming, and just recognize that you always have to adapt. And I mean, it just happens in real life, right? You have a child who's sick. Well, crap, now I have to call into work. I have to do whatever. Things happen all the time. And so I wonder if maybe we can draw some parallels between those things, sort of the working on ourselves like we might work on a company.
I think that's exactly right. And I think if you think about it, if you flip it, when I help large companies with large brands, what we're doing there is actually looking at those brands as people, right? We're thinking about what's their identity, what's their persona, what's their tone of voice, what's their style. We're personifying that brand because, going back to what we were talking about earlier, those brands have intimate kind of human relationships, friendships, enduring personal relationships with their constituents. And so it's actually, one less bridge to get there if you're thinking about yourself as a brand. I mean, sometimes it feels a little disingenuous to say, oh, everybody's a brand. And then you start thinking like crazy social media world. But if you flip it around and say those brands, they're just trying to be like human, right? And we're already human. So we're already a step ahead. And then you get down to the work of like, yeah, it's hard work to self-reflect and figure out, who you really are, what you believe, what you stand for, what you're good at. But it's also fun work to do that. And that's exactly the same process that you go through if you're Nike or you're Apple, and you're going to do that for yourself and maybe build a business out of that.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that could be really strong in there too is, you always hear people, back to, thinking about social media and all that, you always think, see people talking about, practice your passion and do what you're passionate about and, do the things you love and all this stuff, and it's really hard for the guy that's maybe just working in the mine and has now been laid off because of COVID to think now is the time for me to live my, my me, discover my why. And so I understand that, this kind of advice maybe isn't practical for everybody. And I understand that there's a range of people with a range of problems right now and difficulties. So I don't want to downplay any of that. But I do think that it wouldn't be a bad thing, for anybody from all walk of life to sort of be a little analytical this way and maybe be a little more intentional with the choices we're making. Many of us, have followed in career paths because of a parent, or we're put into some kind of situation because of, necessity or whatever. And especially now, there may be a lot of people scared or in panic or, who've been laid off and who are now suddenly looking for opportunities or whatever. And so I think it's really important, to think of ourselves, at least to reframe it as putting us in sort of as a human brand. Think about how you would evolve to this new market that we have. And, and I think that uncovering some of those personal things, the whys and the, what is it that does bring you joy, even if it does feel a little hippy dippy, I think could be really critical in helping you find not just, financial success, but maybe happiness down the road too.
And sometimes that crisis is, the kick in the butt that moves you forward, and it's ugly and unpleasant and uncomfortable while you're going through it. But, if I think back to when the internet bubble burst in 2001, and, we found ourselves both unemployed, and both of us ended up in brand new career paths. Mm-hmm. And, that was when I made the move from management consulting fully into branding. And I'm not sure how long that would have taken me if it hadn't been this like shock, to the world.
Well, and my story is not dissimilar in just that, I was laid off from a full-time position and had been freelancing for 5 years at night. And that layoff was the nudge that it took to send me into business for myself for the last 20 years. But I may have never made that step if my prior employer hadn't been, kind enough as to lay me off. Yeah. And so now in retrospect, of course, it's easier to be a little more grateful, but it at the moment it was much more scary.
Absolutely.
So for those guys similar to me who all the nightclubs, all the bars, every place I normally work is now closed. And I know a ton of people like myself who are now framing houses and doing, odd jobs here and there, whatever they can get to pick up. They're just now kind of creating a new business or new entity or new brand. Can you walk us through some exercises that we could possibly do to kind of define who we are and our brand and what we need to do to kind of make some headway in that right direction?
Sure. I think, it doesn't have to be a year-long, deep exercise. You can do kind of a quick and fun approach to it, which will get you really far. Thinking about who you are, pick a couple adjectives to describe yourself. Ask a couple people that know you well to pick a couple of adjectives. Put those adjectives on some Post-its, put them up on your wall and sit with them for a while. And if you're then going to be building a website for your new, handyman company, and you want to know what the heck that website should look like, or, what should be the kind of personality of it, or what colors should you choose, those Post-it notes are going to give you some good direction. Like, that's kind of who you are, and you want to be who you are in the world. Likewise, thinking about, who am I marketing my business to, and who are they, and what do they care about? Okay, they care about, like, back to the, handyman example, they care about help getting stuff done around the house. But maybe you could think a little bit more about, in the way that you would do in an advertising or branding agency, we would talk about functional benefits and emotional benefits. Do you know anything else about those people that you particularly are going to serve? Are you going to serve people who are perfectionists and really, really want the highest quality job well done and don't mind paying for it? Are you going to serve people who really want some hand holding and just don't, know anything and want to know anything, and they want somebody who's going to take care of them? Or do you want are you serving people who want to be your partner and they kind of know a lot about DIY, but they want somebody to do it with them and make it more fun and take it up to the next level? Those are 3 different businesses. And so if you can think about, and 3 different ways to market your business. And so if you can just take a minute to think about who it is you're going to serve and, how you're going to serve them, you're already a long way to putting something out there that's more than just, I do X, as do 100 other people in town. Now you've got an angle, personality, and it's yours.
That's very true. I think it's very important to kind of analyze your client. A lot of people overlook that step. And, by defining who your ideal client is, you can eliminate a lot of the, like you said, the guesswork involved of your target market. And by being able to do that, you have a direction, almost like a target on that you can shoot at, and then you can specifically go after them, and it makes your life a lot easier in the end. And I know with me, it took a long time for me to kind of figure that out. And there was a lot of garbage that I kind of went through in the process of figuring that out, where I ended up doing a lot of work that I didn't want to do because I didn't know who I was going after. And when I figured that out in the DJ world, it saved me a lot of headache and a lot of problems.
I had the same experience when I started my business. And I think that's natural. When I started my own business 10 years ago, my strategy was take all work that comes to me of any kind. Anyone who wants to pay me for anything, I'll do it. And in the very beginning, I think that's not wrong, right? You have to sort of make a living, and you're not totally sure exactly who you are or what people value about you. But I think the more quickly you can hone in on, well, actually, I enjoy this. I'm good at this. Or I enjoy this more than that. I'm better at this than that. And, these are the types of things I want to work with. You save yourself a lot of energy. And we all have, limited resources, right? Limited marketing budget, limited energy. And it's really hard to say no to a paying client. But over time, what will happen when you kind of focus your energy is that you're going to be spending less energy for much more return.
Yeah. Ryan, I think you've had some experience with this as far as defining your demographic and kind of honing in on where you want to go.
Well, and it's funny, Mike, that you keyed in on that, because I wrote down the word here, niching, and or niching, depending on who you are and where part of the country you're in. I wondered if maybe you talk about that. So in both the last couple of comments, you've sort of alluded to this idea of sort of narrowing your field, right? Versus being all things to all people, just be one thing to one person. And, and it's funny because it's a little bit counterintuitive. I think a lot of people fear niching down because they are afraid, well, God, if I'm turning away 90% of people, then that's also 90% of business. They're not thinking that, oh, well, maybe I could get, 90% of this little micro niche. And so I wonder if you wouldn't talk a little bit about sort of, generalization versus specialization. I think you could probably do it through sort of a brand perspective, but I think there's, some practical information there for whether you're starting a company or, starting an art career.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you raised the art piece too, because it's true in the art world as well. I think this is one of the hardest things to do, certainly for me personally. I think it's been an extremely hard thing to do because I'm wired like a generalist. I'm genuinely interested in everything and I kind of want to do everything and don't have enough time. And so for someone like me, it's not just about leaving the financial opportunity on the table. It's also the intellectual opportunity. And I want to do all those things. So it took me a really long time to do this with my business. I would say I only was able to put that stake in the ground. I do these few things for these few types of clients like 2 years ago. And like I said, I've been in business for 10 years. So this is something I personally have really struggled with. That said, it's tremendously helpful because if people are thinking about, you're not top of someone's mind all the time, right? And so if I'm just a general strategist working in every industry and I do all sorts of stuff in the branding and marketing world, are you going to think of me when your friend says, oh, I have a friend who works in digital health who needs help with a innovation project? No. But if I do digital health work and I do brand positioning and innovation in digital health, then you're going to go, oh, I know somebody, because it's so specific. And if I continue to do more and more of that work, which by the way, I was already specializing in that before I was brave enough to say I was specializing in that. But another benefit of actually specializing is that you get actually good at what you're doing, right? You develop expertise in this area. You learn the language, you build a network. Whereas, doing a much more diffuse, what I was originally doing was like all across consumer products and also some B2B technology, much of which was healthcare. And it was like everyone everywhere all the time. Yeah. I think that's something I definitely really relate to. And the same is true in the art world. If you think about artists who, achieve phenomenal success, for example, you remember if I say Mondrian to you, it's, Mondrian and you know exactly what that looks like. Or I say Monet and I know exactly what that looks like. And this is sometimes a problem for artists because sometimes artists want to explore and they're, constrained but people expect you to draw water lilies. But, and that's a separate problem. But I think, focusing both helps you develop your skill set and also build your recognition, your recognizability.
So, the one thing I have to say, first of all, is that I'm thrilled to death to hear that it took you so long to niche down in your own business. So, because we have we've just gotten to the point in our business. Now, mine has ebbed and flowed and I've worked for agencies, but we've been steady working on our business for about 10 years also. And like literally just this year kind of started to put the flag down and say, okay, no, this is going to be it. I just know it, and still we were doing so much with healthcare and all this other stuff too. And I was like, but really we don't prefer to work on like sort of relationship based industries. So company, like commercial real estate, commercial, anybody who still does business by handshake. Right. And so those are the people that we want to serve. And so, but it's literally just been until this year that we've started to think about it. Of course, COVID threw a nasty wrench in it, and we're not moving as far as we, had hoped to move. But I do love to hear that I'm not alone in this struggle with niching, because it's sure easy to say it's important, but it is hard to follow up on it. Second thing I wanted to get into was, and we touched on it real briefly with, asking your friends about, a couple adjectives for yourself and things like that. But I wondered, as an artist, and, you bring up, like Monet and some of these other people, I always think of a guy that I like called Damien Hirsch that, does really cool, really, stuff, but his things all look like his things, and so many do, the Banksies of the world and stuff. Everything looks like Banksy's that's Banksy's. And, that's on purpose or by design. But those people know who they are. And I think one of the things that we get so caught up in, especially now in sort of this social media world, is who we are versus who the world wants us to be, or who we even think the world wants us to be. And so many of us, are posturing and acting as if, and sort of maybe even get a little muddled and kind of forget who we are. But I wonder if you as an artist, because like I say, I've seen some of your work, and there's sort of a recurring theme in your work. Like clearly you have a voice or you have a thing that is your thing. And so I wonder, if you could just kind of talk about sort of, and maybe you don't see it this way, but sort of like the bravery of being able to just be you and be allowed to be you. And sort of overcoming, you've come from a lot of different career paths and maybe chased down different opportunities based on what you thought was the right choice or whatever. And I wonder if, the point in life that you're at, if you've landed at a spot where you are comfortable and you're just you and you feel comfortable with being you, or if it's, just something we're always working on.
I love that you asked that question. If there's one thing that I think is probably my own life's work, it's that. And I suspect that a lot of people are in that same boat. And particularly if you have a sort of a creative product that you're putting out there that's kind of, you're showing your soul in some way, whether it's music or art or whatever. No, I mean, that's a very, very hard thing to do. And I think there are some people who are just kind of born them and that's it. And they're just, it's easier for them or it's clearer for them. I think, but most of us, in our 20s, or it's not like I already know who I am and this is it and I'm going to do that till I die. And I know for me personally, in the art side, it's no different from on the business side. I want to do many different things, and it's been like really a struggle to focus my voice. It's in my style because I want to experiment so much. And I was really inspired by, I heard Moby on a podcast recently on Alec Baldwin's podcast, and he said, "Oh, I've written like 10,000 songs. Most of them are shit." And I would never let anyone listen to them, but I just write songs. I just write songs all the time. And I thought, well, that's exactly my process. I loved hearing him say that. So the way I've done it is I allow myself to be free to create anything I want in any different styles that don't make sense to anyone, that don't go together. I do whatever I want to in my studio. And then the process is curation. I mean, like literally I throw things away.
Yeah.
But also, when you're putting something out there on social media or on your website or choosing what to show in a show, that's when it gets hard. And that's when it's the same as that process of like, okay, I'm going to say I do brand positioning and innovation for digital health. Okay. That's hard. And it gets easier though, as you get older, because you've been doing it for longer. And I can look back and see those recurring themes in that crazy zigzag exploration. There are actually authentic, organic, recurring themes that I can then point to and go, oh, I guess that's me. Right. But that takes time.
Yeah, I kind of have a similar experience. Whenever I put something together, I'll be messing with it for a day or two, and then I'll jump to another project, and then come back 3 or 4 days later and listen to it again and throw it in the garbage, and then find another one. And finally I find something where I'm comfortable putting it out, and then it's crickets. And it's like, okay, well, never mind, but it's me, and I put it out there because I reflect to it. It's like, this is who I am as X, it's DJ Ontic. I do this series called Anything Goes, and it's like, it's music that I enjoy. It's music that I like. And whether people like it or not, I don't care. It's mainly I'll listen to it more than anyone else. If you go and look at the play count, probably 100 of them are mine and 10 are from other people. But, it's just personal styles and being able to express yourself in your form, whether it's art, music, whatever. I think it's very critical that you kind of have your own, your own style, your own genre, your own appeal. Granted, if I'm working for a client and they have a request list of XXX, that's what I play. Or if I'm working for a radio station, that I play to their format. But me as a person, I play what I like. And if you don't like it, go to another website.
Yeah.
It's kind of my
there were two things that you mentioned that I think are actually, really insightful in your take on this. Was first of all, this idea of curation. I think that the assumption is, as we're looking at social media and we see every 26-year-old with a 60-foot yacht, we sort of assume that this is just the life they're living. Like you can't ever put together the math. Like, how can this person actually be on the beach, 300 days a year? Like, how does this work? And so, but I think curation is a really critical component to that. And as you develop, or if we try and put it back in the frame of sort of an ad agency, this is how it works a lot too. your creative team will provide a million different versions of something, and then as a collective, you'll cull it down, and then it will go to the client, and they'll cull it further, and then it'll come back and go through revision. But this idea that the first thing you do and that you run out with is always going to be the perfect thing, like this concept, I think is maybe damaging to the way that so many people move forward in life, and so they throw something out there, like Mike said, he gets crickets at first. And, and then you feel kind of bad about it. You're like, so maybe, I'm not being validated or something. And so, but the reality is, and also just to use Mike's example, it's wild curation. He's picking all these different songs. And if you listen to any of these Anything Goes mixes, because I've heard all of these, they're all over the place, but they're really fun, right? It's all great music. And, I think the point is that, we don't always have to get it right the first time. And I think the other piece you arrived at, and I explore this with almost every guest because we keep hearing this from people, so it works for me, is this idea of sort of instant fix or instant gratification, and that things are just going to work. And like you mentioned early on, this idea that, how do I get more engagement? How do I get more likes? How do I get more whatever? This idea, sometimes it just takes time, and that's just that. And I've come across that as, I just turned 40, and I found that there are so many truths that I'm landing on now that I couldn't have gotten to at 28. And at 28, I might have been looking at YouTube going, God, how do I get rich quick? How do I solve this problem? Somebody has to have the answer. But I think ultimately what you learn is that, the zigzag path you've described is life. Like, that's the thing. That's kind of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's where the expression, it's about the journey, not the end goal, right? That's maybe a little trite, but it's truth. And I think that's much harder when you're first starting out of the gates and you want to make a mark. And not that I have any less desire to make a mark now, I just realize that the journey is already where it's at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Well, so as we're starting to get towards the back half of this thing, I wanted to get into another topic with you that I thought was really interesting, and that's exploring the sort of the future of work. I think that what you might have meant when you were talking about the future of work 6 months ago might be a little different than the future of work now. But I wonder if you have any insights or any ideas about sort of, where are we going in business and what might future look like? And, this topic's particularly interesting to me. In another life, I run a remote work consultancy. And so we've been, obviously very busy with all this COVID stuff. And, and in that remote work space, obviously so many of the remote work advocates are sort of thinking of that as the future of work. And so many of them are misconstrued into thinking that everyone will work remotely and that's the future. But so many of us are actually just sort of advocating for choice in work. And so I wondered kind of what your take was on the future of work and where you think we might be going, either now as it pertains to this or, Lord willing, if we get back to some kind of normalcy.
Well, certainly it's true. When I started thinking and writing about the future of work over the last year, I couldn't have envisioned how kind of urgent and transformational the notion of the future of work would become. But interestingly enough, the topics and concepts that I've been playing with in that arena really haven't changed. So I focus on, when I think about and talk about future of work, I think about creativity and I think about collaboration. And if I look at what's happening now, yes, there are a lot of logistical changes. There's technology-enabled logistical changes. Certainly there's societal changes happening, which will have far-reaching effects. But I think that the increased need for and value of creativity and collaboration remain, and if anything, have been amplified. So I was thinking about 6 months ago, okay, so, AI and robotics and what does that mean for the future of work? And are we all going to become, be replaced, right? And my argument is absolutely not. And in fact, what it's going to mean is that our humanity and our creativity is going to be in higher demand and higher value, because the sort of rote day-to-day things that we as humans can do, we can program machines to do. And so what does that leave, as the highly valued skills, are those more nuanced kind of things that make us individuals and make us human. which I think is actually very exciting and will help a lot of people unlock their creativity or give them the opportunity to use their creativity more, in perhaps roles that historically were less creative, as those roles go online or are automated. And I think now, if you look at the things that a sort of crisis, and particularly a global crisis, brings up, we really need creativity, innovation, whatever you want to call it, to address all of these unknowns and uncertainties. We've got an urgent call to action, right? And the only thing that is going to pull us through is ingenuity. There's a million different takes on, how we're going to get to the future, no less the future of work. And all of those things are things that have never been done before or thought of before. And if that's not creativity, I don't know what is. And the corollary to that of collaboration, I think, is fairly obvious. And I think we can look around and see how difficult that is, right? It's difficult to collaborate across borders and across cultures, but clearly necessary.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. It's funny. One of the things you pointed out right there at the beginning is how, as much as things have changed, so much has stayed the same. I recently did a webinar with this woman named Angelina Ebeling. She runs a company called Acework. It's basically a job board for remote workers who are looking for it. And we did this webinar on the effects of the crisis as it pertains to the remote work market. And how things have changed with Corona and all this stuff. And we went into it with this idea that, God, the world is this whole new place and all this stuff, and how different things would be. And then as we got talking, we were like, God, well, no, the fundamentals are still there. Everything is still core, and it's and so it's really interesting that you mentioned. Because creativity and collaboration are so core in the before time and also now. And, that bit didn't change. Now, what we do with it, and maybe this is back to our earlier idea of this evolving definition of creativity, is what will creative stuff manifest down the road? Will it be, new and innovative ways of doing tasks that we used to do? One of the things we keep watching out for in the remote work side is, so many people laid off, furloughed, things like that. But remote work is generally speaking, not always, but for a lot of people is a lot more efficient and a lot more effective or productive than co-located work. And one of the dangers there could be, well, these businesses are going to find ways to get real creative with a lot less people, and which could actually end up posing risks to people's jobs down the road. But it might be, a great evolution for a company. And so, but it's this forced creativity and then, increased, hyper collaboration that are going to sort of manifest these things. And so I think it's an interesting time, but I love that, despite all the change and what feels like a massive change, so much has stayed the same. And actually for me, that provides a little bit of normalcy and allows me to sort of keep my feet planted. And then you go, oh, okay, well, yeah, the world's going crazy around me, but I'm not moving. Stuff is still kind of where it was. And so for me anyway, I think that helps people maybe weather the storm when things look a little less chaotic.
Yes. That and remembering that change is a constant. And this is not the first time that our society has been faced with sweeping global change or crisis. And we will get through it.
Well, Susan, we're almost at that time. Where can people find you and look you up?
So the best place to start is electrifyyourwork.com. That's kind of a landing page, easy to remember. And from there, you can go to my website, my Twitter, Instagram, or my art. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, no, that's great. Well, thanks so much for this conversation, Susan. It's really great. And, I always like it when the creative folks come on because it's something I actually know about. And so it's always good. It makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about sometimes. So I really appreciate it, but really grateful, like Mike said at the top, really grateful to have you on, and especially given the crisis and all the stuff that's going on. It seems that while we all technically have more time, we're actually also busy. And so we're really grateful for you taking the time to do this.
So true. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was a lot of fun, and so glad that you're doing this work and having these conversations with lots of interesting people. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, cool. So thanks to everybody who tuned in. Catch us next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks for listening.